Welcome to Amateur Redneck Workshop. I'm Harold, and today I'm going to talk to you about scopes. The reason for that is because I've got several scope and sight reviews coming up in the future. Okay, you probably noticed that I review rifle scopes now and then, and that's because I'm interested in scopes and I love high power scopes. And I've got more sighting system scope reviews lined up for you, so uh, we're going to talk about them today. We're not going to do a lot of other things. So if you don't want to hear an old geezer talk, you might want to move on. But anyway, besides the iron sights that come on rifles from or guns or whatever from the factory, you got a choice of special iron peep sights and one thing and another that can, some of them can be adjusted for distance and elevation and things. And then you got a huge variety of scopes and red dot sights and lasers and whatever you might want to find. There's something out there for your use. Now I've watched a lot of scope reviews and discussions on YouTube and read articles on various forums and such related to the subjects, and I find that there's as many opinions on what scope you want and how to set it up as there are scopes and people. Uh, I would guess that if you're of a particular certain opinion, you can find some expert that will verify that your opinion is correct. How's that? Now, the most of the rifles I own are 22 long rifle, which are mostly limited to, to 100 yards or less for, where the most of us could shoot accurately. They'll reach out a little further than that, but the accuracy is horrible even at 100 yards when for this small and limited power, cartridge. You might think that I only need maybe one scope. Well, that's not true. That depends on what you're doing as to what kind of a scope you need. If you're hunting, maybe you need a 3 to 9 zoom scope so that if something's further out, maybe you want to zoom out a little bit and get a better picture of it. But if you're hunting, you need a wide field of view so that you can follow whatever might be running along, wait for it to stop or whatever. The most of the stuff you're going to hunt with a 22 would be squirrels and rabbits. You might hunt something as big as a coyote or something, but maybe not. I don't know. And you're not going to be deer hunting with it, not legally, because most places it's against the law to use a 22 for deer hunting, because mostly people just wound them and they run off and get sick and die out in the woods after a week or two, from infection or something. It's not the world's highest power rifle, but it's a lot of fun. Now, most of the reviews I do are at 50 yards. Sometimes I might decide to do something at 100 yards if I feel kind of risky, and want to take the chance on it. I know that 22 Plinkster, he's done a lot of shots where he shot, I think, out to 500 or 600 yards with his 22. But he's an exceptional, person. The rest of us aren't likely to have that kind of talents. Now, when you come to discussing scopes, and like I say, I've watched a lot of reviews, a lot of discussions. Scopes come in a lot of prices, from the low price ones that I review up to $4,000 plus, and like everything else, there's what I call scope snobs, guys that believe if you don't have at least $1,000 scope, you're just not there. Kind of like the Harley guys, if you don't have a Harley, you ain't, well, in there too. But the scope snobs aside, you got scope snobs, you got gun snobs, you got guys that think if you don't have a BMW car, you're low class. It's everything you go to, you got people like golfers. If you don't have a $5,000 set of clubs, you're really not a real golfer, and so on. So the same thing in guns. Just like you can take a Walmart 5-iron and probably get a good drive with it, you can take a low price scope and get a good shot with it. I've done well, at 22 long rifle competitions with low cost scopes. As long as you can see the crosshairs, and the target, and and then you hit where the crosshairs are. That's what you need. You got everything you need right there. Now I do have a couple of pretty expensive scopes. I got a Weaver T36 and an ATN X sight for shooting at night. But most of the competitions I do, I use just, the regular cheap scope, if that's the way you want to put it, cheap scope. Uh, when you want to get a scope, you got to figure it out as to what are you going to do with it, Or if you're hunting, you want a 3 to 9 wide, wide field of view. If you're shooting targets, then you want a high power scope with a lot of magnification. The further away the target, the more magnification you really want on that scope. That's where that why I've got a Weaver T36. That's pretty much known as the bench rest scope, because almost all the guys use at least that much scope. Some of them going in for these. I don't. I forget what they're called, Black Knight or something. I don't know. They're about $1,500. Some guys are going in for that kind of scope, but my Weaver does so good. I don't need any better than that. So once you figured out though what you're going to shoot at, what scope you need, then comes up the problem of where to zero the scope. And just like there's as many opinions on what scope to get, there's that many opinions on where to zero the scope. Now, one popular opinion is to zero it at 25 yards, and that works for me, for hunting or whatever. Some guys say, no, if you're hunting squirrels and rabbits and things, you need to zero at 75 yards. Other guys choose 50 yards. And I can show you a little chart here. This is hand drawn, and not just really all that good. See, about here you can see it. Say you zero at 75 yards, okay? So at 25 yards, you're going to be plus 0.59 inches above the target with your crosshairs. At 50 yards, you'll be, let me get my glasses on here so I can read this stuff. I wrote it, but I gotta have some cheaters to read it. All right, here we go. At 50 yards, you're going to be plus 1.19 inches above whatever you're aiming at. And 75 yards, since you zeroed there, you'll be right on. At 100 yards, you'll be down to minus 3.10 inches below your target, because the bullet tends to drop off rapidly when it gets out there due to air resistance and gravity. Now then, say you zeroed at 25 yards. At 25 yards, you'd be dead on the target. Zero deviation from this line, this straight line. At 50 yards, you'd be minus 0.06 inches. Still pretty darn close to zeroed in. At 75 yards, you'd be 1.89 inches low. At 100 yards, you'd be 5.59 inches below the target. I tend to like zeroing at 25 yards, although the experts say 75. So that's something you're going to do depending on what you want. That's hunting scopes. But then let's say we're getting into competition. Then you may be shooting at a target like this. And I don't know if you can see it, but right in the middle, I don't know which way to move for this thing. Right in the middle of that green ring there, you can see that tiny little circle. That's 2.7 millimeters, a tenth of an inch. This is the target you shoot at 50 yards for U.S. bench rest shooters. You're shooting a 22 caliber. The 22 bullet almost will fill that dark green circle there if you get dead on the middle. That's how small that little 10 ring is in the middle. You don't want a 3x9 scope to shoot at that. You won't be able to tell where you're at. You could be you'd be hitting out here with a 3-to-9 scope. It looked like you did pretty good. You got in the target. But I guarantee you, if you start getting outside this 9 ring, your score is going to go way down real quick. So if you're shooting at targets, It's a 50-yard target. Obviously, you want to zero at 50 yards. Shooting at a 100-yard target, you want to zero at 100 yards. Now, a really smart person keeps a little notebook in their equipment bag, and they know where they zeroed their scope. Say they mostly shoot at 50 yards, they've zeroed that scope at 50 yards. But they know that they're likely to be in a competition where they need to move the scope out, shoot at 100 yards. They've got it in that notebook how many clicks to go past zero. And there are some of the better scopes that you can lift up the little turret that you adjust the windage and elevation with and turn it around to make zero align with a particular mark. That way it's easy to start counting, as to how far it is, how many clicks you're going to go for the next elevation, whether shooting out further or in closer or whatever. It's a good strategy. I'll show you how my Weaver scope works on that. All right, we'll uncover the little elevation turret here. If I can make here, quit wobbling things around. And I think you can see the zero there. Now underneath that zero there's a line runs straight up and down that separates the scale with lines that run across this way for you to use for calibration. Say that this thing ended up on 7 or 8 or something when I had it zeroed at 50 yards. Well, that might be kind of inconvenient to calculate from. So what this scope has a feature is I can undo this screw here, right in the middle of it. I can undo this screw and I can pick this thing up and move it around. You can see better there now, the little up and down line. I can move this knob, adjustment knob, around to make the zero line up with that mark there. Alright, from there I can come around however many clicks it takes to do the next spot that I want to be zeroed in at, and I can come back down, and when I hit that zero I know that's where I zeroed it at 50 yards. Now there's some scopes that there's some scopes that have a little spring in this turret. You just pick it up and turn it around and set it down, and that will align your zero with the zero mark. It's not something you got to have in a scope. It's just one of those little conveniences that you get when you pay more money. Now you don't just have to have that fancy feature like on the Weaver, and there are some of them, the turrets are spring loaded. You just pick it up, turn it around, set it back down. That's the most convenient ones of all. And I've got some scope somewhere around here that's got that. I don't know which one. But the rest of them, the lower cost ones, you just can't do that. You come around till you've got it zeroed, and you need to look at the little up and down scale that's underneath the turret. Write that down and what number you're pointing at, and what was the distance you zeroed it at, so that when you move to another distance you can come back. And it doesn't hurt to keep track. If you run it out to 100 yards, write in your notebook the last zero was 100 yards. That way you don't have to spend so much time zeroing over again. Although shooting at the target to check your zeros is fun anyway. But if you're at an all-day long competition, you might not have time for going out by yourself and zeroing the thing over. You need to know how many clicks to turn. All right, so this is where my videos are going to be, probably a lot of them for a little while. Not all of them, but for some of them are going to be about scopes and sights and things like that. So that's all I've got to say on the subject today. And I don't know, maybe there'll be a Bubba joke. Not counting on it, but maybe. Bubba went in and visited one of his fancy cousins, and his cousin had this big party, with all the college students that his cousin was going to school with. This pretty gal come walking along there, and Bubba's, he thought he'd try and get acquainted with her. And so he walks up to her and he says, "Where does y'all go to school?" She was kind of put off by his grammar there, but she thought, well, maybe she'd just take a chance and be nice to him. She says, Yale. He says, Bubba looks there and he says, where does y'all goes to school? He did, Yale. Well, that's all, folks. Y'all try to subscribe if you're not already a subscriber. Leave a comment if you got something to say. And above all, remember, keep on keeping on. Bye now.